Kindle's in a private out of business. Nice, nice, like.
I think guys still use it.
Yeah. But anyway, that's a very nice standard Rambam. It's just
yeah, no, I see. I know.
Rambam really needed big thick stuff.
So does Duhan tag it Rambam?
Yeah.
4 or 5 good editions of the Rambam.
Yeah.
What's 4
or 5?
Well, what did you say? There's 4 or 5 editions of Rambam B'chal?
Good ones.
No, they're good. I think.
What's this? 4 or 5? Wait, what's the 4 or 5? Is the Rambam La'am?
Yeah.
No, the Shabsi Frankel. The Shabsi Frankel. 2 Mishnah Torah. What's his name? Makbili has a version of only Rambam without the Rabbit. Very good, actually. Very good because he could read Rambam. The only Rambam since I don't know how long printed without the Rabbit.
No, but you do it. You just do in one set and one volume.
Yeah, but it has a bigger. It has a Parish even has like a bigger set also. There's a 1 volume and there's a normal set of it, like 5 volumes.
I know. Garrett only has that Rambam. Anything else is like insult to Rambam.
He became a Garrett, but he became a Chusud Rambam.
No, he became a Garrett for Yeshiva Shemalach, and then I guess.
Yeah, it's an insult.
He decided the Rambam to be.
Just like the Chaim, the Brisker, are not happy with the Gilyonis Kazanin on the side of it. And there's what's not to do? 2 Kappas Rambam.
Yeah, it says emotions on me doesn't be on top of the Rambam. Even if you're not mashbid. No, it's not a safe for Kodesh B'chalal.
Okay, this is definitely not a.
No, go ahead.
The Rambam would have read this. No, this is my shelf of books that I'm reading. I'm religious.
I'll do that.
No, Pia Lech Leishkelten? I've never seen that. I was curious. What?
Not so much.
No, it's not. I forgot. I thought maybe
you're right. According to the Rambam, I don't know.
Is it there?
It's unwritten. First of all.
Whatever. This is covered. I don't know. According to the Rambam, that's clear.
Ik heb nog steeds.
Nee, dus you can't halacha that you shouldn't do it. There's two kind of halacha, right? There's only halacha about there's one halacha that's not putting Torah under other things. Whatever. Well, it's not much. Whatever. Okay. Good answer. Anyway, not about that. I tried to mix it up. What do I want to say? Yeah. Anyways, okay. Let's do kapach. Let's do shilat. I don't know if he's finished. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's the fifth. Sorry, there's Rabbeinu and there's Shilat, but he uses his nisach, I think. Yeah, but Shilat has his own. It's not called Yafshita, it's called Rambam Hamega. I don't know what it's called.
Yeah, that thing looks very nice.
I don't know.
Where do you see it?
Very hard to find. The lake they don't sell over.
I would only see it on advertisements.
No, the only reason I saw it is because by Shver had if the guy knows to throw the cousin to send him like she's like present, it just goes on the shelf.
I never saw it.
She said in one volume.
She said in one volume.
Yeah. We'll try. I wanted to figure out the actual putting in their books. Let's see if I have anything. I wanted to figure out the actual proof of the Rambam.
What's his name again? Quinn. Yeah,
Linus?
Oh, this guy. Who's this guy you had over here?
Yeah, man.
Yeah, his argument.
Everson?
Everson, yeah.
Okay. Nein, we'll learn the Rambam's arguments. But so let me try. This got some advice in Shanalis, right? I think we get there. We'll learn the Rambam's argument was is
That's spider. Right here, yeah, this one and that one.
Wow, but this doesn't actually have that. I didn't print that. I didn't put in the Barik Vines, which is all right. Here it does. Here it has it. But the other one don't. I think this is a different gear, so maybe. This one. This one has it.
Yeah, I got this one.
I thought I didn't. Okay. I learned it like 5 times. I still don't understand the one word.
What? The Rambam's proof?
Yeah. That the learned Anochas quite. There's 26 Anochas, which is beautiful. Either someone can think it's not 26. A lot of the Rambam Chassidim don't believe that he removes them, but the truth is that he did.
26 is the name of the Rambam?
Then he has to take his start.
Of course it is. Yeah. You really think the Rambam was going to call the briefs? He didn't think that it proves anything,
I don't think,
but he liked it.
I don't think you want to put a Muslim in an Arabic site. I don't know.
The Arabic, the numbers are universal. That's, by the way, that's the beauty of gematria. That it's true. Gematria is the only kind of the Torah that is 100% true. Others stimmt don't as a math. Others stimmt das oder nicht. It doesn't prove anything. That's not the problem. But no, but actually, I wrote about this a few times. The Rambam actually, there's a lot of rights that the Rambam actually using numbers deliberately.
26.
26. I don't have another die because this is the only thing that he has literally 26. It's a big number of anochas. Dumb as he calls them. But what's his maraya? The raya to other places that he seems to end up at the same number even when things change. The big example, one of the big examples is number 14, which uses 3 times.
Why would Rambam keep numbers?
Why is not hashara? Couldn't have proved that.
Come on,
couldn't have proved that. I'll tell you why.
No,
not only why I wrote about this. I found that I had a whole sheet about this already. That couldn't call that one of the rayas that good raya that is that the Rambam has the number 14 in the same context 3 times, and they're 3 different orders. Okay, so the Rambam in has 14 shirushim for 7 mitzvahs. Okay, the shirushim is not the same thing, but then he divides the mitzvahs into 14 parts, right? Sefer Yad. The remez of Yad is not the Rambam's remez, but I'm pretty sure that he thought about it. Chol Yad Chazak Asher Samosh is like too obvious remez for not realists, but he divided the mitzvahs into 14. And then he divided.
Like that? What do you call Yad Chazak?
Not called Yad Chazak. He called it Mishnah. Someone else. I don't know who gave the name. I don't think it was the Rambam himself.
Really?
Yeah. I think that it doesn't say that I looked. Maybe I'm about to it, but I looked. I didn't see the Rambam using this listic or saying it. It's known as that because someone thought of this Rambam, and unless you could look it up and tell me if I'm right. I don't think that the Rambam himself called it that way. No, it's not called. The name of the book.
I think it was true.
The Rambam calls it the Chibur, or he calls it Mishnah Torah. He doesn't call it Yad HaChazak. But then the Santa Zach is that Rambam divided the mitzvahs another time in Moira and Chale Gimel when he talks about time, and it's a different seder. It's not. Yeah, it's somewhat no. Right, yeah, it's different. There's some differences, like you said. But there's some difference. Some of them are the same, but there's some differences. And another word, somehow they always ended up being 14. Then they look that you say, this is how many I came up with. Okay, but you see that there's different ways of dividing them, and somehow it always ends up being the same number. And same thing with what Jerusalem, when you say that the order of Sefer mitzvahs, maybe the mitzvahs of them might matter with the Tanya mitzvahs. Okay. But so what is the maskuna that is bedafke 14? That in other words, then how you do it bedafke? You do it bedafke by putting together, and right, it's always arbitrary in a certain way. All these categorizations, right? The Mushal Aristotle. I just saw someone talking about Aristotle. We're going to see it. Aristotle had 10 categories, right? Remember? Yeah. There's 10 categories of Aristotle. Essence, etzem, 1 etzem and 9 mikrim. All the spurim bring also. Anyways, because he said that anything, okay, we'll get to it. And then people say this is, because nobody understands why pink 10. Like, okay, 3, 4, we understand. But then when you get to 10, it's really a big number. You can always put things together, and it doesn't seem like they're good reasons for cutting it up and putting it together. So of course, 10 is a nice number. It makes things easier. I've got Nacharayah from the Rambam, which is the number.
Put it on the side, like from an instinct to bother him.
What do you want? I want to really concentrate. It's still on top of it?
No, let's put it on the side. Put it on the good.
It's not good. I'm not worried.
No, I think it's good.
I don't care. Just pull them down. Let's put this like this.
I tell you, I'm not saying you're wrong. Tell me you're right.
I fixed it.
No, I just keep on saying it. I don't know. It's the first second issue. It's not. Could be I'm wrong. Could be I'm talking wrong.
What did I want to say? So anyway, so that proves that it's 14 bedafka. And the way by doing it bedafka is by cutting. There's always some degree of freedom. It's not even if you categorize something. There's always you could put this together with this. Or even Prukim of the Rambam makes you a good example is Prukim of the Rambam, which I don't think have usually a good reason. Have a reason why. For example, I saw that there is 10 Prukim. I actually counted yesterday. I don't know why, because 3 of them don't belong there. I don't understand. He said that it's very interesting halacha because Okay, not for that extra because he put in Hilchas Kiddush Hashem and Hilchas Mechikas Hashem. Two compared Kai and Vav, which like no shy. Like I can understand the connection somehow, but like I understand, but it's like he should be another. I don't know. It's weird. And in mitten, zwischen Matthias Hashem and it's like it's very fun. And all the halach. It's far. You know where you see it? Because all the halachas for Mandaran start with Perek Kai. They all don't understand the first word Perek Kai. And they're that this because the Siggy, you know, and then they skip the rest, and then they go on to Hilchas Talmud Torah or whatever, you know. There you go.
Hilchas Tshuva also was 10. When you know that
Hilchas Tshuva is also 10. Hilchas Tshuva also has some kind of structure like that, where like it jumps back and forth between being.
The correction from same.
And Rob just came a minute ago. And JB brings us a touch of
Rambam.
It's not shy. And also the last one, you can keep it well.
No, these parts are wait.
The same Pedic is
you don't
know that an option is good.
I still have this minute. I don't think that it's mifrich that Rambam himself thought of this kind of chalik. I'll tell you. Okay, the order again. Let's see also have this one. But again, so for example, now just showing you. So the Rambam have very little logic. If you see, so this is something that they did well. Then this Mecham have a Rambam. I have to buy it. I have to find where to buy it. And
but
they give Kepler.
Right? They're very well.
But besides for that, they give Kepler to the Rambam. They put in the middle of the space so you could see how each Pedic has usually 2 or 3 different subjects.
No, that's very nice.
Rambam's very organized. Rambam's the Chashidic organized. Always starts with the klal and the that. But almost every Pedic is not only one subject. Like you could see, half a Pedic is about this no halachas, and then you know learn halachas bas b'chol. So there's bas b'chol and tarivas bas b'chol. These are 2 halachas, and they made a header, so you could makes life easier to read. But you could. What's interesting to see is that it's always coming from an arbitrary choice. So we put. I could have made another Pedic like. Take what's the b'chol. We can like what's the b'chol, but then tarivas what's the b'chol of another Pedic, and I could put it in the same Pedic, and it's.
You probably hold
both of them would be
worthy of a subtitle.
Again, both of them would be logic, but it's not like that. So sometimes some people are very long, some people are very short. It's hard to figure out what's. I think there's some arbitrary logic in the sense of like maybe a Pedic on zi groß, zi klein, so be'erich. It's hard to figure out. Sometimes it makes a lot of sense. Sometimes he puts things together into one Pedic. The interesting thing is that these people counted, and they found that the Mishnah Torah has exactly 1,000 prukim. Now this is too exact a number to have happened by a mistake. Okay, so again, whenever you see round numbers, it was done on purpose. So it could be that these tens also. It's possible that he definitely wanted it to be 10, so he caught, and it's not it worked out. It's not such a hard work. This 1,000, I don't know. It's funny.
But it's not. It's against the grain of number.
So now, it's fixed that cash. I have another third example that I have. Wait, one second. Firstly, that's not true. Third example, what someone sent me.
So what's the difference?
So I have 3 examples already. Fourth example is the Hidgum Ikrim themselves. A very basic example, I think. Although it's not said itself. Yeah, there's 2 Hidgum Ikrim that are different. Hilchas Shiva has 13 and they're different ones.
He doesn't set them up.
No, he doesn't call them numbers, but there are 13 and they're different ones. He skipped.
Ramchal has different techniques.
But he flipped. The Rambam in Hilchas Shiva Beragimel flipped Schav Onish with Torah Shabbat. In other words, he divided the 7th or 8th into 2, Torah Shabbat, and he took out Schav Onish totally. So don't ask me why. He took out that's what it found, but I don't know. He took out one entirely. The Hilchas Shiva is about Schav Onish, but the rest of Hilchas Shiva, but in his list of Apikorsim, he doesn't have anyone that's koyfed with Schav Onish. I think maybe I'm making a mistake, but either that or Ashkocha, but he doesn't say Ashkocha b'chlal. It never says Ashkocha. He only says Yidiyah. Ramaz Makbid never say Ashkocha. But that's a whole other issue.
Makbid?
Well, he doesn't do anything by mistake. You know, that's one thing that he usually doesn't do is make these kinds of mistakes. Okay, this is not Hashir. You'll come. We had a whole.
It doesn't say.
Which one? What did I?
Could have been. He doesn't use it. He doesn't use it ever.
1 second. I just wanna. Yeah, he skips Chavanish. And anyways, I'm just saying, okay, this is about.
We don't use the word Ashkach and Ikrim, but I put in the Murray use the word Ashkach.
Yeah, use the word Ashkach.
Yeah,
and he kind of doesn't believe in it, so that's why. But he believes in only Rederich Dvaikes, whatever. But now, Chavashman doesn't believe. Have a different shot. And what I wanted to say is that the point is that Bible does have numbers in Hilchos Shivas. Chamishahem, Shloishahem, and he does not give the 13 number. But if you add them up, you get up to 13, and it's a different 13. And this is funny because why did he? It looks like and I'm showing you how he split because he took out one, so he had to split another one into two. You know, another good example of something like this happening by the Shvutim, right? And Ramban talks about this. That there's always 12 Shvutim, but they're not always the same 12, right? Sometimes they're. Sometimes we do it Levi, so we make Yosef one, sometimes and so on.
No, that's in Tosh B'Ksav, it makes sense.
But in Tosh B'Ksav for sure. Wait, so Tosh B'Ksav, you're masking that it cares about numbers more than.
Definitely.
Okay. So now the Rambam. Now the Kasha. I'll let you the teretz. The teretz is quite called the Rambam absolutely does believe in numbers. There's the whole parak in Moira. This someone sent me after I wrote this. Right. The whole parak in Moira in Chelik Vayis Parak Yud, where he talks about numbers. The number 4 and the number 10 or 9, I'm not sure which in the Parak Yud. It's a related Parsha Shavir. That's why in the Chalem of Yaakov, the Rambam wants to understand what's the Silam that Yaakov Avinu saw. And as looked as he found and brings a medrash that the medrash said that they had 4. The lighter got 4 levels. And he says, although there's a different nisach in the medrash that says 7, it's the wrong nisach because it has to be 4. And of course, 4 by him means the 4 Yisoidus, and not only 4 Yisoidus. He has a whole list of 4s that he connects to each other. There's 4 Galgalim that have stars in them, and 4 Yisoidus, and 4 a ganze list. And he uses the number 4 as the thing that the logic behind this whole list. And in other words, his whole raya that's the pshat and the mushal is that it says the number 4. Otherwise,
it says the concept of 4.
The number 4, not the concept. The number 4.
Why
he uses because that's what underpins his whole logic of this whole. In other words, he asks the Rambam how does 4 work? How does numbers work in Kabbalah and Maral? The same way, right? They say, why is there 10, 12 shvutim? Because 12 is there's not something called 12, right? Well, this what usually say because the cube has 12 lines, which is quite simple. Yeah. The cube has 12 lines. That's all it is, right? But the Rambam also does the same logic. He said, when it comes to explain the Silam of Yaakov by referencing the number 4. The number 4 is and this all only based on a medrash. The medrash said that there's 4. That it's 4. How do you call it? It's 4 levels of the light, and those means 4 levels. Whatever his pshat of that 4, and he has a list of things that are 4. So he does seem to use numbers in a very similar way to, at least when he talks about the Farash Safer, very similar way than the Mekulim and other people use numbers. And he also, that's one of them. We can chaykas on about this raya. And second,
why is
the Rambam definitely works with numbers, just like anyone else does.
So the Kabbalah, they hope there's something inherent in numbers. It's connected to reality.
He also has it's connected to reality.
What reality?
4 Yisoidus, 4 Galgalim, 4 Mispar Arba Zehi Mifla.
It's very good. Why?
Because he doesn't actually defeat the stars, because it corresponds to the previous parak. The previous parak said that there's 4 Galgalim that have Kechavim in them, and they give tzira to the 4 different things in the world. The
reality has a 4 in it.
Yeah. Has some power structure.
Reality has a structure.
And that's what he often goes to the third thing. It says there's 4 reasons, the 4 sibbas for the Tnias Agalgal, whatever this is supposed to mean.
Therefore, Yaakov's dream should we conform to this
structure, this 4 structure.
Yeah.
The whole reality could be divisible into 4. That's his, or divisible, or in other words, what I'm showing you is that he's using the chitzonistic thing like Eli the 4. Yeah, I'm coming. I'm trying to I'm sorry.
Let's see if we have got I wanted to, I started telling him about, I didn't get to, that's why I wanted to call back at a few things I wanted to tell him. I kept calling, what's the news? I said, all right, I couldn't mind for 3 days straight. Tuesday afternoon, I gave up already.
You got
No, I was out of the whole evening already. I didn't like bother, I was like, beginning was like like causing, you know, but that's not no. I'm looking at it. My closest between Schnauzer and you know that. About Schnauzer and what's the other guy? No, no, no. We were writing. What are they arguing about?
You told me already you're talking about it.
What?
You told me that they both missed the boat for major.
No, you're saying the Rambam. No,
you're not talking about these things. The Rambam never spoke about such type of groups.
No, I think that's why you mentioned it. I mentioned it.
You can make him that one? No, okay, no.
Well, essentially, if you remember, in the science of the Russian Zohar, and I can tell you the Russian thing. This is what?
Russian Zohar.
Zohar is
okay, yeah, okay.
So, also this whole thing about the meeting. Only if you can sign it, you have to be for basic, right?
Not each sign. I mean the book.
No. If you believe it's based on it's the most.
It's somebody is with yeah. Okay. It's here.
Yeah, I got a new lesson I got in that word of okay. I think it means that your mind, something wrong with your mind. I really think that means that your mind. What do you mean, Simcha Nissen? Isn't it going to mean not that you're moved, you think you're that's just going to say so. No?
I'm sorry.
No?
Yeah, okay. Okay, whatever. Ich will nicht reden wegen dem Ziffer. The teretz in the okay, just to finish this the teretz is that number one, he does have this idea. He's not a Platonist, of course, but he's that numbers are very real and
what's the Platonist? What's the Platonist? I mean,
Plato and what's his name? Pythagoras. They came up with the theory of numbers being.
I know.
I'll give you the basic definition. Shal is what is the basis of reality? What Aristotle calls substance. That's this person's name. And the question that people were asking since the beginning of Greek philosophy, at least, maybe also Jewish philosophy. Lafika Torah, right? So there's a Torah. Maybe it's Yitzira and things like that. Maybe it's called Masa Baraj, Lafika Masa Mekava, whatever, however you want to connect it. The question is, what the Rambam calls beginning is the Hascholos, right? Well, what does it mean, the Hascholos? What it means is, what are things actually made of? Or what is the world actually made of? In other words, a big shot that's made out of cups and things, but that's obviously not true because this is a big kiddush. We already so used to science, which has a certain picture of what the world is actually made of, but they didn't have any science or any of this. And this was starting to think about this, and you start to think, okay, there's people, there's animals, what kind of things. Now, what macht a mensch? What is actually made of, right? So we could start with a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different directions to go here. You could go in a materialist direction, which is what modern science goes in, and there was in ancient Greece already people that went in this direction and said everything is made out of stuff. And they they call it matter, but it's a lot of different kinds of stuff. So we have to give an account. We have to be masber why it's different, and it's not only different. There's also a lot of difference and similarity, right? All people seem to be the same in some sense and different in some sense, and the same thing with all oceans and all water and the world. The world has these basic similarities and differences, and it's a big shaila how to understand it. So, for example, one direction, which is the direction of what's the guy's name? Democritus, atomists, with the Ramam, the Kalam went in this direction, and the Ramam very much didn't like it for different reasons, is the direction that everything is made out of some little pieces. What atomists didn't have the idea of atoms that we have. But it said that there's some little pieces, and those little pieces, by the way they connect with each other, they make all the different things. Okay? This was one shit.
Like that a little bit also? Cover, like
more. I don't remember. I think that it makes sense that he should be closer to it. Yeah, because the Chazovas has the column proof. Okay. Yeah, because anyway, I'm not trying to get at this. I'm trying to show you. Then there's another Plato and people in his direction went in the opposite direction. They said they were very much more interested in finding the basis of the similarity of things, right? They said there's like some certain rules, a certain regularities, certain Sachen, Geschenke Seite derselbe Weg. And maybe that's really what the world consists of. And everything else is just like what we call the spashtas, the stalshas of those rules. And Pythagoras, at least, and we don't know if Plato himself, but Pythagoras was a mathematician. He famously said that the world is made out of numbers, literally numbers. The concept of a number is an amazing concept. And so that everything has a number. So this is like the thing that includes everything. And the world is, if you like, go down or up, whichever way you conceptualize it, you'll stop thinking about the things as they are samgestellt, as they are, and you'll think of what actually exists. What actually exists is numbers. This seems to be what the Soviet Sida believes. At least as long as it was understood to mean numbers, and before it started to be understood as something else. This is the basis of all these theories, like the Maral, that they see numbers, that it's not just a drish, it's not this is the difference, just defining the difference between two uses of numbers. This is a theory, and it's not a crazy theory. There's still people that, serious people that take it seriously, kind of smart and have us. They believe that numbers are really, in other words, the Pythagoras, Aristotle said that the soul is a number. Okay, because what's a soul? What we call a soul, right? In psyche, in Greek, what we call neshama is usually an einikel from that concept. What does it mean? It means that something makes the human being, right? Maybe it is, but you have to explain how, right? It's something that he is really. And he came up with the idea that he is a number. It was not a shama number. That's and Aristotle in his beginning, in his other book on the soul, he goes through this list. Like some guy said, a soul is a fire, and it's a that's not a number. This is shit is Pythagoras. He literally means but the abstract thing is a number. Numbers are abstract things.
I know, but numbers that's what it means when he said the word number. He's using numbers as a mushroom.
No, number is real. Number is not a mushroom. Number is an abstract entity. There's such an entity called numbers. It's a real thing. A number is a real thing, according to Platonist way of thinking. In other words, there's another way of thinking about that.
Oh, when you mean a person is a number, it's number one or number two? What do you mean?
No, not number one. A number.
What?
Idea of number.
A number. Either maybe it's a certain number, but number one is not a thing. You are applying it to a thing when you say this is number one. You're counting things with numbers, but numbers are before counting, right? At least in the Platonic way of thinking, numbers are actually a concept. They must have an existence. Otherwise, a paquet, the reason why every time you put away one and put together one thing and one thing, it turns into two, is because in the numbers, that's the rule. So that's their guidance to the world to work in mathematical ways. And the world does seemingly conform to math, to the laws of math, to the halachas of math. So therefore, they said the numbers. That's what it means when people say that's not like this is not an irrational theory.
Today they call information. Today they call information.
You want to talk about information. Information is also an abstract thing, but that's not numbers. That's another theory. If you want to actually say that the world is made out of information, which again, but it again depends. So there's the big machloekes since the times of machloekes Aristotle and Plato. What do we see the abstract things as primary, or do we see the material things as primary? And primary doesn't mean do they exist. Everyone agrees that, well, at least Aristotle agreed that we can agree that both of them exist. The big shal is what's the yesod? What's the primary thing? What actually is behind everything? In other words, what causes the other things, or what's right? That's really what understanding, what at least philosophy is after, in the sense from the beginning. We want to know what actually is, what is the actual things, right? Obviously, the things that we see, well, you could just say that that's the actual things, but that's silly because it's easy to disprove. So, in other words, everyone has sod. There's not like as if there's sod. And the theory of numbers is not an irrational theory, it's just a different theory of what is behind everything. Of course, people that like mysticism are more happy with that kind of thing, but it's not behechlech like that. But behechlech even more crazy. It's just another theory. Nafkamina is that, of course, the Rambam and Aristotle very much don't like these theories, and that's why he came up with his third theory, which is shidduch between these two, which was called the theory of chomer and sira, right? The hylomorphism, however it's called in English, which is that everything has both. And he said a person is a person because he has matter, which makes him up as a person, and he has another thing called the sira, form of a person. Not the form is what actually exists, like Plato said, and the matter is just the reflection or a cell or shadow of that form.
The form is number also?
No, numbers are maybe forms, but
it's
a kind of thing, a similar kind of thing. It's not a number. He doesn't like the concept of numbers. But it's a kind of thing. What I mean by say a form is what Form just means what makes this matter be configured in this way. It's a real thing in his understanding because it's an abstract concept, but them concepts actually exist, not something that doesn't exist, not something that only exists in the mind. It actually exists. It actually exists because if you ask why is a person, this is a person, why is he not an animal? Why is he not? One answer would be to say, what answer is to answer in a totally materialistic answer? A person is what happens when all of these atoms that make you up come together in this puzzle. That's what a person is. This is Shitta Aleph.
That's who? That's who?
Well, Shitta Sepakaitis. Anyway, in the ancient world, it's Shitta Sepakaitis. Epicurus thinks that. But no, he also says, in other words, it came together by mikra, because there's no rule. In other words, that's what really happens with it. And this is what is believed today also, more or less. That there's nothing besides for that. This is very important. There's nothing besides for the matter. There's something besides that, which is the organization of matter, right? And it looks like an animal, it looks like a dead person or whatever it is. The difference between a dead person and a live person is just however you understand it. Whatever shtickle matter needs to be there for the person to be alive, got ruined. It moved away. It went in a different location, right? It's just set up differently. But there isn't anything else. And I think, so what is there? Why is it in this way? Things happen to be. That's what the Shitta Mikra really means in the Epicurean sense. And there's a bunch of atoms, then have nothing. There's no principle. There's no thing that makes it be organized in a certain sense. And Aristotle said that this is crazy. I don't think this is in the Birkam Ashkucha. It's a very nice place where he brings it. But the Aristotle learned later. A lot of people, also today, people think this is nuts because this is not an explanation going. This is called. There's all kinds of different questions. This gets to the question of God and things like that. Are very much connected to the same question. It seems a bit crazy. Again, in ancient times, Mr. Epicurus was not Peshiga, we aren't God, whatever. He was a very smart guy, and he believed that. And not only him, it was not in the Medina, because they were all religious, of course. He's literally the Epicurus from the Mishnah. We got the word Epicurus from that. That was drogating that meant, right? We got the Epicurus, call Epicurus to Nikri al Shema.
That's the Stoics.
No, the Stoics had a third shit. The Stoics were atomists. The Stoics were atomists, but they believed in order. They believe in providence and Ashkucha. They believe that they believe in Ashkucha Ketzeres. They didn't believe in Bechira. They believe that everything is determined. But they believe in Ashkucha. So they're not. They're atomists. So that you can be atomism. Obviously, is true as we know today, in a certain sense. But the philosophical question is not totally who but who. Ken Zana the Welt is gemacht als a kleine Stücklich, and there's still a principle of order. In other words, if you'll divide the world, like the mushal, the concept that I always think, like if you take a book and you grind it up, you won't find any letters. You'll find a sticklich of ink and a sticklich of paper, right? In other words, if you'll shake everything up and find what actually exists, right? Now the problem is that we have to do this in an abstract sense, because when I take a book and I grind it up in a meat grinder, it actually destroyed something, right? Nobody says that I just took it apart, right? And according to materialists, I just took it apart. But the truth is that it's not true. Like you say, information was lost, right? Information is the modern way of saying this, at least because information obviously exists, right? And some information was lost, although we can mind, so maybe I could have a magnifying glass and whatever. But assuming that I can destroy.
What's the definition of information?
There's a mathematical definition. Information means like knowledge. It's other, and in general, you could say knowledge. Yeah. But information, the fact that something is one way and not the other way. But there's a technical definition, but hardships in the guide. In other words, information. What you think of information is there's a technical way of saying it in information theory, but it's
like what is to say about it? Is that what you mean?
No, that's a description. Information. I'm just saying. I don't know information. It's just too many concepts, too many things. What I'm saying is, let's go back to the ancient way of thinking. Okay, and when I take a book and I grind it up in a meat grinder, okay. So materially, I didn't destroy anything. In other words, if your theory of the world only includes matter, so I'm just trying to show you what I mean when I say a principle or an essence or a substance. What is the actual thing? If it includes not matter, then grinding up a group book doesn't really destroy anything. It destroys the order of things. So in other words, the mikra, the gekili, the can't line a book, it's kamanish. But be'etzim gunish getosh. Now, obviously, this sounds stupid. That's why it's stupid. In other words, it's very weird to think that way. most people don't like Epicurus' theory. Epicurus' theory is also a sod. It's very important. All theories of knowledge are theories of secret, theories of sod. That's what theories of sod is. Nothing special. Nothing special in that sense. Everyone agrees, Kol ha'olam agrees that what we see is not what reality is. Well, theories of sod is a theory of Torah, but also, right? When you see a table, that's not really what it is. It's only how it appears in a certain state or at a certain time or a lot of things have to come together, but it's really, if you'll ask a biologist, that's really wood, and then you'll ask a chemist, and it's really chemicals, and you ask a physicist, that's really physics, and you ask something before that, you'll say it's really, and maybe you'll ask some information guy and say it's really information, but that's already a conjecture. But right, so that every scientist in the world agrees that there's Torah Sanista. Torah Sanista is miskim l'kol.
It's also good. You go into the definition of Torah Sanista is that there is.
That what you see is.
The Torah Sanista really is the content of Torah Sanista.
And the shal is what the content is. Then we're arguing over detail. What the content is. You know?
Sod. He doesn't mean that he's out there.
Of course not.
I'm saying that's what he's saying.
That's a different thing. Then we're talking a different content. Yeah, but okay. I'm just saying in the world is not.
The idea of sod.
No, but it's very important to realize this because okay, the word is absent. So we're looking for the substance. What is the thing that actually exists? Now, if materialists are right, I didn't really lose anything by destroying my book. This is just a very cute example. Now, obviously, that's wrong. There is some bookshaft, right? Which exists when this book looks like this and doesn't exist after I destroy it, right? There's something else. In other words, if we have a complete theory of the world and what exists, we really have to include something beyond the matter of the things. At least if you're a reasonable person that doesn't believe that it's a pink vein.
Okay, tell this book nist, but it's sure books.
But that's what I'm saying. And book, but what is the book? That's what I'm trying to get to this question. Let's grind it up. Let's cut it up. Let's figure out what it really is. And it obviously isn't, by the way, there's different manner ways of talking about this problem. It's a real serious problem. The emergent properties are different things. We even take water and show you that if you cut it up into atoms, there's no wetness.
Right.
And water is obviously wet. Right? Wetness is a real thing. It's not dim yet.
You can't say
that's not a good. That's an example for what they call emergent properties. But the point is, this is what the problem from the Alpazat and the Nietzsche of their problems. And now, therefore, some people went in the opposite direction. They said what really exists is only bookness. In fact, the reason why we have books is because bookness of Gewalt, but bookness became the book. That's Plato's theory of the forms, basically, where he says that there's some form called horseness, and that's why there's horses, right? And there's some form called the good, and that's why we have morality. That's the important one. And there's some form called the beautiful, which is why we have beauty and truth and so on. All of these concepts. There's really an ideal. The thing, and whenever we talk about, we say this is a horse. What do you mean to say when this is a horse? What does it touch when they have? Exactly. What I mean to say is, I'm in my mind comparing it to the real horse, the Amazdig horse. Does
he mean it's soy? Does he mean it's
Plato is Mamish?
Yeah.
Theory of forms. This is Plato. This is Plato's theory. The theory of forms is more or less what they think more than believe, just without speech. But maybe with later, whatever. Yeah, of course. Now that's not linear. What I want to say. So that in the same way, you could say what really exists is numbers. So this is a very shallow of the toichen of the form. So according to Pythagoras, if we divide the forms even deeper, we'll get into numbers. Not exactly the same word of form, but it's something very similar. Now, therefore, when you say everything is numbers, what you really mean something very real. You mean that if you'll grind up the world in the meat grinder, you'll end up with only numbers. Because that's what really exists. And matter is just a configuration of numbers.
It's not
really being mafshit. Mafshit sounds wrong. When I say the word mafshit, it sounds like I'm taking a ladder, like Yaakov Avini's ladder, and going up. But really, Yaakov Avini's ladder is going down, right? Question of perspective.
Okay,
what I'm saying, no, mafshit down means go more basic, right? More simple. And we cut things up. That's why I use the metaphor of cutting things up, right? But cutting up in your mind, because when you cut it up in the reality, you only get physical things. But that's not enough. Therefore, you have to cut it up at least one more level deeper. If you look at if we'll be what will be left with, right? Well, what's Toiv, right? So the Mekabbulim literally said the Toiv. Yeah. Well, the Ramban said that it's matter and form, right? Which is Aristotle's theory.
This is matter and form?
Yeah, Toiv is matter and Toiv is form. The Ramban, I think the Ramban didn't make it up. It's earlier before. Similar pshutim was how people understood Masa Bereshis to mean in medieval times. It might be still now. But that's what. Okay, this all just to make clear what we mean. We said that's one theory of numbers that Ram doesn't accept. At least his Rebbe Aristotle doesn't accept it. So he obviously probably doesn't accept it either. Although there's always theories and stuff.
So you wonder why he made 26 proofs.
So this would be one mahalach. So one mahalach would be, and therefore that's why Gematria is a very true thing. And now I understand that's what I'm. But that's why Gematria is true, because if you think of the real thing behind everything as to be the number of it, then actually connecting the number is very real. Maybe it's confusing different levels when you try. The reason why we can't prove things from Gematria is because confusing different levels. The level of pshat, you can't work with that, right? But the level of, if you think only about the numbers, then it actually might make sense. In other words, the real Kabbalistic theory is that all numbers must have a meaning. If Amulek is a Gematria, whatever, then it must be really the same thing at the level of numbers. Now you ask me, how does it connect? So I'll give you an explanation of how it connects in Olam Hazeh, which is not the world of numbers, it's the world, a lot of worlds after numbers, but it really has to be like that. Therefore, that's why Kabbalah is a science, the most scientific way of understanding it is Kabbalah. Okay, now there's a Nachli Naini, but that's not the Rambam stairs. So, but what's the Yakim is looking for numbers? The simplest thing to say about numbers, I don't know how I got into this. Mama's just sidetrack. The simplest thing, because I wanted to prove that the Rambam, I wanted to prove that I had 3 or 4 different proofs that the Rambam uses numbers for Dafka. And one time in Moed where Imamish used part of his Dirish. And he said, well, obviously, Teretz is nish as a help of numbers is what underlies everything, because that's a theory that he does not mask it. It doesn't at least work with ever. But what says, there's simpler reasons for that. One of them, which I found somewhere, I don't remember. I remember that. There's a basic other teretz, which is that it makes life easier. That's one teretz. Now the Rambam, just like the Rambam says in Chalei Gimel about Midrashim, where he said that they're militzas ashir, poetry. Poetry, and this was the kind of poetry that people liked in those days. And most people think that this is the Rambam. Midrashim. The Rambam talks about the Medrash about the Arba Minim, right? Talking about the Al Minim. Was the Al Minim? So the Medrash looked. They said the alle Kinder lernen that they Midrashim, right? They said the Eugen, they said the Euren, and they said the Shedra. What's the Medrash? The Al Minim. This different Midrashim. They go on this kind of thing, and the Rambam was like, okay, this is the reason for the Al Minim. No, this is the reason. This is poetry. This is connecting things. What's poetry? Associations, right? To connect just beauty of it, the poetry, but it's not really the town. These kind of, most people read, that's the Rambam or something like that. And most people read this as the Rambam being Mazal in the Drushin. No, the Medrash is just poetry. But that's only if you're not a poet. Because poets say, oh, this is amazing. And the Rambam, I don't think the Rambam was not so pro-poetry in general. True. Him and Plato were not big fans of poetry, and the Rambam in his letters says that he doesn't write a lot of militzas, only when he needs to, because he wants a kind of language that expresses the truth, and poetry is the rhetoric. Poetry is not a good way of showing the truth, but he does use it, and he does know that people like it. And Plato in the Republic was very mad at poets. But anyways, but the Masa, the Rambam does understand it and does like it and does use it. And this is nothing wrong with using numbers. And that's one level of pshat. And secondly, so in other words, it's like they understand the smach, like we understand the Remusa. What was the Chassidus Wurma? Yeah, it's I can Bashuv Maram is relationship. I don't know, whatever. Why can't they just say without the name? Yeah, that actually says in there. It says in Medrash. But that's what was coming to Zung Namal. In other words, you have a good idea, right? You want to talk about castle. But you know yourself that it's nothing to do with the pshat. You could go with the Maran and make consider, but big pshat that the reason teretz for this is, in other words, the reason most of the one teretz that the Rambam would definitely accept it. It just makes it easier to remember things, right? It's like because everyone knows the pusik, so I'm connecting it with something that you know. It's how memory works. There's nothing wrong with using numbers the same way. Right, it has this vasmach. But this is how numbers also work, and one just makes life easier. So of course numbers are a very useful thing, and cutting things off to the numbers end up to an even number, or like Yid Gimel, which is a number that when Yid Gimel B'Sharachim or something that everyone knows about, Rambam didn't forget about it. Makes life easier. It makes it easier to make some more geschmack. The Rambam is pro making things geschmack. He's not such a in fact he likes when things are only about the truth, but there's a second thing which is even more, if you want to make it a little more technical, you could say that it's like in computers there's something called a checksum. It says this somewhere, I try to remember, it says this somewhere with Fetish about something. Maybe in the Rambam himself or someone else. If I give you a list, the Mishnah, by the way, uses numbers all the time, right? Just a good example of that. Why does it use numbers all the time? In other words, but let me give you a better explanation, like not only a psychological explanation, because you have to remember about Pesach, so I remember before. There's also like a mamish recording explanation, because if I tell you there's a bunch of Rosh Hashanahs, I won't tell you how many you are, but next week someone's going to have a gift of the Mishnah which only has 3, and there's not going to be anything to show him that he's making a mistake. Numbers are actually a form of redundancy, it's called. In other words, I tell you the same thing twice. If I just tell it you twice, so okay, that's one way, but just to write it again. A shorter way is to give you the number. In other words, I tell you 10 things, and I say, and now it's a very good way to check if you have all of them. If someone's going to have one saksaviyad or a cipher that only has 9, say, wait, there's something wrong. Well, either the number is wrong or that is wrong, but it's already 2. It's already 2. Numbers usually are less wrong probably than the text, so it's easy to forget one. It's harder to forget a number, right?
Because it's a protected measure.
Yes, but literally in computer science, for example, it's literally used when you send a message on the internet or whatever. After the message, they give you some summary, like this is the 100 bytes. Now that computer that gets it can check. I'm just using this as an information theory. The computer that gets it checks. Okay, if it's only 99, so something is wrong. So he sends back a message. It's a check. So it's actually very useful check to give numbers to things. And again, since people remember even numbers, so anyway, this is.
Chazal had numbers.
Chazal used numbers in this way.
Why it's like a thing redundancy. Why did it say the lafuke mai?
By Zakla, also by numbers. Zakla.
No, sure. Why don't you do the kedushin? So the lafuke chuppah comes nach chuppah.
Right.
And we say in numbers come lafuke something.
Right. Okay, but that's the Gemara. Okay, we have to understand how the Gemara uses Mishnah in this way, but it's not a steal. It's what I'm saying.
You're saying the Gemara is a smachter.
That could for sure be, but the Gemara is doing something similar. In other words, okay, we have to understand how we understand that Gemara. You understand it to mean like this. The Gemara, the Challah style in the Gemara. Yeah, the Gemara mamish thinks that the Mishnah is like a pusik. It should be nidrish, bechseres, v'yisrael.
No, but you do derech chachman.
So what they're
why do you tell us a number for? We have a list.
So you say Yitzchak Zoch was the list. Well, I guess, but what I'm saying matches with what they're saying. In other words, if you make a mistake, I think Chippa is kind of mashbalan the number. In other words, it's not a steer mamish what I'm saying, because it still steals with what I'm saying. Forget. I'm saying that this is a way to make you not have mistakes. The one way of having mistakes is just by forgetting. Another way of having mistakes is because it's like a different shit or an idea that maybe Chippa is kind of not a steer with these two things, but it is true that the Gemara doesn't.
Sounds like it's meant to teach.
It is true that the Gemara doesn't usually use this chat in the Mishnah. And that's very much like the first Mishnah use this lafik the Gemara a lot. This kind of idea of Zekur, and they use a different context. I have to remember. Whatever. It's B'chlal Shala and
Okay, Nachli, you want to start.
Nachli, there are 26 Hakdamas and 4 Rayas, which is very nice because it's 26 Gematria and 4 Rayas. But anyways, and. I wanted to read the 4, and I'm gonna get to it. Let's read it.
What are we proving?
We'll say Pshat, proving 2 things according to the Rambam. The 2 things that he said are the 2 provable things of the world, of the Torah. Or Metias Hashem, Achdus Hashem. Okay, another stira. I'm not gonna say that. I said that to you last week. You can listen to it.
What do you mean?
Because because I had this stira. Because the Rambam in we learned last time. The Rambam in Yesod Torah Perek Aleph says that Anochi means. Metias Hashem le'elecho means Isra v'Zora, which is the opposite somehow knowing Messias Hashem, and we have a battle about that. And he says this very often. I have a list of like 8 different times where he says Ikra Torah is Messias Hashem ve'Ikra Avodah Zarah. Like if I get it, I said that's what I get, and so on. Now the Rambam, I think. Yeah, maybe some of them are. Muslim, I looked at him, made a list. Shema is another. There's more.
Yeah, a few more. We had Chametz Matzah, maybe.
What to say about Chametz Matzah?
I think I'm just trying to.
I don't know. I don't remember. Okay. Could be. Maybe that's another line. No, it's no. Once you find these kind of ways that he structures things, you see it all over because he doesn't always use the same language, but you see that it's working with that. In the beginning, whatever other places. The Magdumah, when he said the Raspurim, he says, Sefer Hamadash, he Masha Tzurich Ladas, he Yichud Hashem V'Yisrael V'Yisrael, like that, and so on. But now in Chelik Beis Perek Lamed Gimel, the famous chapter about Anech V'Yelecham Perek V'Rishimani, we discussed it here. He says that there's Anech V'Yelecha are 2 things, which can be proven by Derech HaMa'ifes, and they are Metiz Hashem V'Achadisai. I thought that Lielecha is a Sefer Dezirah. There's nothing to do with Achad Hashem. I mean, it's somehow to do, but it's a whole different. And the Master, and he said that those 2 things can be proven. And when he says it can be proven, he means K'ma Shekusav B'Chelek Beis Perek Aleph, right? And what is he proving here? In Perek Lamed Gimel, Chelek Beis, it says the 2 things that can be proven, which he Mefarish al Pi Dat the Gemara of Neichel Lielecha, as let's yeah, whatever. But the what I'm interested in now is that it says Matiz Hashem V'Achdisa. Where is it?
And now what? Now
and not like usually is not the position that Rambam usually brings for Achdis. This is the psikim on Lielecha. Is the Avodah. Where is it? Of course, you could say a pshat. But Rambam, when he talks about Achdis, he always talks about Shema Yisrael.
You're saying something you do with Achdis.
Right. This is one time. Usually he uses Achdis Shema Yisrael, and Lielecha means either Rezora or Metiz Hashem.
He says Achdis Hashem one place in the
Right. That's not Mamash Raya. Fetish it is one time. It could be that it's but yeah, so it's a big shout to me. But Lamasa, when he talks about the actual proof, he proves those 2 things: Metiz Hashem and Achdis Hashem. In other words, inside the mitzvah of Anochi and inside the mitzvah of Shema Yisrael, which Achdis to him means very important, because I feel like the Rambam literally, I just realized this week. The Rambam Mamish made Achdis mean Anegit. It doesn't have any other meaning. In other words, there's 3 ikrim really, but they're really only 2. And like there's only 2 mitzvahs, right? So there's 3 ikrim. One, we have to read this inside and see if I'm right. But it looks like if you read the Rambam, you see him the more you read the sources that he read, you see that what his mamish doing is puzzle matching Shtiklich Torah to like Shtiklich Aristo, you know, and he Aristo he discussed, other people discussed how when they spoke about God, right? They also talk about if there's one or a few gods, right? But the Rambam seems very uninterested in that. Of course, that's also true. There's not a few, but it doesn't even make sense to have a few because the whole concept of God means one. So to him, Achdis in simple sense is the Einzigste. Nicht Baal is the God, but and maybe it's also what he means in the second decade. She Echad. But it's not what he proves.
Right, okay.
Most of the time. He also proves that in a certain sense. He also proves that because there's no 2 Mechiva Metzias, because it doesn't make sense. Okay, so it's true that he proves that. But he mostly proves... What?
Baal was never understood it.
Yeah, okay, it also nicht Havai. It's fixed Akash. Of course, the Rambam understands that Havai means Mechiva Metzias. That's how it was understood. This is also his historical shot. And Baal was not understood to be that, according to the Rambam. And according to what the Rambam read of not Baal, but he read the Tzaba people, and that's what he seemed to understand according to him. So
the what?
The Rambam was historical. The Rambam's Pshat of the Zura is historical. He didn't make it up. He looked all the Sifra of the Zura they could find, and he looked what they believe, and he didn't find they believe in Mechiva Mitzvah. He found the Torah believing in that. Right. Good, that's what it says Mechimesh, according to the Rambam. That's good, the sister. But why couldn't he ask? Now you have to ask Kash, why couldn't the Rambam think that their sister Torah and Kisvet Tzaba? He didn't think of that Kash. No, this is not a level Kash. You're saying he's asking that. I don't know the answer to that. He didn't believe that that's reasonable. This is not no, it's a serious question, but I'm not getting into this now. If I'm wegleiten, that's the andere Mal. The kid is so. I'm just saying is that the second dikka to him almost not only like I'm saying, so also means of course that there's not two, but mainly means she'ayne gif. Achdus to him means, in other words, it means that God is not a body, because gift doesn't mean this. It means body, an abstract sense of body, and ourselves sense of body, and that's all. And that's yeah. So weiß nicht, why is this interesting? I'm not trying to figure out that connection between these two things. When he says Yichud Hashem, most of the time what he means to say is what we could call in the general sense of Pshuta, or Shayne Gif. It seems to be in a very important.
It all boils down to simplicity, no?
No, that's another vod. So let's. Yeah, okay, let's try to learn. So let's try to learn. No, that's the second dikka. The third dikka is not a shayne gif. It's a body. It's not a body. It doesn't have a body. It's not a body. However you want to say. So ich will lernen so there's 4 eyes in the chelik base perigdal. Then there's a few more eyes, smaller eyes. But the 4 main eyes, what he calls 4 philosophical eyes, in philosophy, which are according to Aristotle's philosophy and not according to Kalam that he doesn't like, is they're according to the Hantige Achronim, 3 of them at least. The 4th one is very interesting tonight. But the first 3 of them are more or less variations on the same argument.
The first 3 what?
Right. The more or less gebot of the selbe argument, which is ich weiß, ich das steht da. Yeah, I don't have page numbers, unfortunately. It says Chalik Beis Perek Aleph. This is the 3 is this? These are the 3 eyes, the 4 eyes that the Rambam thinks are real eyes. All the other eyes, say that it's not such good eyes and so on. This is the best that eyes was going to do. In other words, this is also the best knowledge of God that we can have, because that's what's important to the Rambam, not to prove that tell Richard Dawkins that he's wrong. That's not what he was interested in. And according to most Achronim, basically Kant came up with this. Dawkins, nicht the kid of Nummer 1, nicht to upwenden Richard Dawkins. Very important. This is a thing like a whole sheet.
He helps his ambition in life.
It's the girl atheism. The Rosh it's the girl atheism. At least he thinks he is.
Yeah,
he actually is. And he is very interested in disproving God's existence.
To everybody.
Yeah.
Hawkins or Dawkins?
No, Hawkins is
someone else.
Yeah. Andere Mensch. Dawkins, and it's very important to realize that the Rambam is not. I think that's a whole other sheet. Okay. And also that's why a lot of Hantige books I don't like, because they seem to be only in that category. The challenge from fighting, it's like I don't end up with any knowledge.
There's proof.
For Steiner, if there's according to the Rambam's ideal is understanding God. And him proofs are, of course, a good way to understand. And these people, they don't seem to be interested in understanding God at all. They're just being interested in Ubben and that is, which is not so interesting to me. Maybe it's a good thing to do, but I don't think that's. For some reason, I read that book. I don't find that I don't feel like I became smarter. This book, for example, whatever. I think the Miller.
No, because today handhaben from the ganze mission.
Why?
To understand.
Okay, could be it's because of that. It's 10 minutes left. A minute actual that. Okay, so now these 3, just now trying to get to the actual thing. Now, so the Immanuel Kant was a human red big Hochus, and he divided them into 3 or 4 different categories. And the basic idea was, was my basic ideas, but it's just important to put the Bissell perspective. There's something he called cosmological proofs. Cosmological proofs are basically proofs from things existing, or maybe more to say from all the proofs that Sibel Rishonim are what we call cosmological proofs. The vart of his is that they're based on causality, based on wer gemacht ist, wer gemacht jens, also weiter. An andere Werte, wo darf es exist of the proofs will sein, darf es etwas los sein. If there would be nothing, it would not make sense. The second kind of proof is what he called ontological proofs, which has to do with Anselm's proof and so on. These are pure reason proofs that don't need anything to exist. They're based just on thinking. And then there's a third kind of proof, which is the kind of proof that most people usually use, which he calls physical proofs, physical theological proofs, which are based on how things are. In other words, they say the world is organized, and is an island organized. And then there's moral proofs, that is for kind of the one that he likes the best. But there's other kinds. But these are his categorization, mehr weinige. And now the Rambam's three proofs.
They weren't morality.
Yeah. Kant is a very big fan of this proof for some reason. That people have morality and that must come from God. Where else does it come from?
It comes from or gives
consciousness of the
or the fact that you care about it.
Heaven's above and the conscious below.
Or the fact that you care about it.
Yeah. Morality, nicht was the morality is, the actual existence of morality. Das man weiß, dass es schlecht zu haben, das ist nicht von Gott. Das ist schlecht zu sein, schlecht. That's what morality. But that's the Rambam. Now it's interesting. This year I found this nice article from a Yid named Harry Wolfson. Harry Wolfson again, einer von den Goyen Hadar in the Union. He's gonna die. He died. He learned in Slobodka once upon a time, and then he learned in Harvard.
The whole thing we read with Gemara, there was a famous article.
They mentioned was threatening. They said that bringing. I don't know, but he wrote a few very very serious books about his Union. And
I'm thinking
I'm
trying to remember for him.
The Lushnara ist aussprechen später. In Wikipedia. The interessante Sache, was he makes you notice, is that the Rishonim, the Jewish Rishonim, the Rambam, and we talk about the Tzadigon and other people, and that's his. If it's an Einikel,
that's why I ring a bell.
No, it's someone else.
Okay.
It's toch de Moshe Wolfson. Zag je in dezelfde begin. Danke. The kids are even zo doen we dingen. And the kids is as he's more the thing that you see the Rishonim only using a certain kind of proof. There's certain kinds of proof that they totally don't think are important enough to go out. Although there's a anxiety del begeg. If you look at the Christians or the Muslims, you do find them using different kinds of proofs. That's very.
They don't use morality.
Okay, that's mamash chiddush of Kant. But Lemushli talks about they don't use the proof. But they do. This is a shalom. They use tradition. In what sense they use tradition? But they don't use the proof of what's a later people. And he says that some earlier people used that a lot. Was that everyone agrees that there's a God. Innate idea, what he called innate ideas, which actually later you might probably use. But he claims that no, the Rishonim used this. In other words, this was something, and he says Cicero, the book that you were looking at, says that one of the big things that they say, in other words, if you read Aristotle, the earlier people, they tend to take das Kol HaMoed very seriously. That Kol HaMoed feels shalom. Well, about
no, they went Lyman. This is like a.
But that's different. But now we're talking about going. So he says that that's the chilik. I'm just saying.
He does use it. Because we use it. One place you write from the end.
I'm just saying, but talk about the innate knowledge. So in other words, that you're born with the idea of God, or all people believe in God, which is more or less true. There's not. I don't think there's any.
What was the proof? Everyone's quoted that.
No, but Nachamo, you can make this into a kind of cosmological kind of proof if you really want. But so there's two kinds of answers. In other words, what everyone has thought about. Okay, so let's go to Brazil and some mentioned the let's ask them if they have a God. Turns out
in the most oldest history, everybody believes in something.
At least that's what we think. Of course, it's very hard to actually figure out these kind of things. It seems like everyone always had a God. All people, at least. Of course, you just say what's always going to land. But the fact is,
not a God that we're talking
not the
about.
same. So that's what he says. He says that because it's not the Rambam was very interested in a very specific kind of God. So this kind of proof never works for him. Because he really doesn't think that everyone has a God. He thinks that only Moshe Rabbeinu has a God. Of course, he taught almost everyone by now Rambam thinks there's almost no of the Zura, maybe in the Tzaba, a few Tzaba left somewhere. But there's basically now, though sometimes in Halacha he says that Christianity is the way to Zura, I don't think he really believes that. As a theological sense. No, he just quoted a Gemara, because the Rambam is a big Khalid. Rambam in Halacha has to quote every Gemara. If it says in Fetish Gemara, not some of the Zura, it says himself that Zura that. The Rambam assumed that it means Christians, which might not be the case, but that's what he assumes. So he had to quote that Gemara. But I don't think that really literally means that the Christians that he knows are Rabban Zura. He pretty clearly doesn't believe that. Of course, you get into questions with Trinity and stuff, but clearly. So that's one kind of proof that he said, and he talks about logical proof if we have it. But the Kitzah is that the most shkiachtige proof, which we find in all this for, and basically every Yiddish Seifer from the Rishonim. This is very interesting, but in Achronim we do find the kind of proof that says that everyone believes in God, or as Ali Yidden, but that's very different. But even that, there's two ways of understanding. That's why he says tradition, maybe they would say, although I don't even know if they say that. In other words, would the Rambam say, I know about God because Matata Mechizuk? I don't think. That's different. That's actually something that we could only know from tradition. Either it happened once. It's not something that I could prove that it happened, but I could prove that someone told me. By definition, history is only known by history. What kind of, that's what someone, how are you going to prove history? History can be proven by witness, man. Let's do andere Wege. Let's do better than that. That's why the Rambam thinks that history is not the best way to get to God.
That's very interesting. It means that this is not the way. He's saying that people know God. They know him from somewhere.
Right. Who said who?
Whatever.
He says that that's Cicero's Ra'ah, and he says that that's not something that you find any Rishonim saying.
But they believe all different types of
God. Because he doesn't allude to it. That the Hamonam and Chamishi, as you shouldn't get all this. You see like, that the Navi, that what
no, the Kizri said that
you see the oil of them to the Naviim. There's something there. The
Kizri talks about natural understanding. But
even though
the Kiddush that he says that because the Rambam this kind of proof kind of assumes that if the Zula has something right. That's the big problem with it. You say Eilan is masking to do a God. The Shabbos, where is the God? Right? That's what we would say. That's what he quotes from that guy.
He used it. What's the name? No, he's basically with the fact, the empirical fact that the Rav mentioned in God.
So yeah, right. So anyways, he says that because the Rambam and all these people really don't believe that. They don't believe that Yelan is masking is do a God. Shabbos Maveir is the God. They more or less think that there's only one real God, and people more naturally don't know it almost. That's basically what the Rambam thinks that you need proof to get to it. Maybe someone that already figured out the proof, like Moshe or like him, could teach it to you. But now he doesn't think that you're born with that. Very important. You're not born with them, and you're not born with Seichel. So it's not even relevant. That's another thing.
According to the Rambam, it's like a sickly decision. What do you call it?
Right. So not only a decision. Now you're talking about the decision. How I know. I'm talking about the things that you know is not something that you're born with. Not easy.
It's created with your mind.
Yeah.
Okay. Gott von der Hamonim is a ganz nicht from the Rest.
Yeah.
The God von der Hamonim.
Exactly.
Where they get the idea of God.
Although I don't think. Okay, this is something what about. I'm have to think about this more. We can not make them stop. Not included making them. It's not. I think that it's only halfway. Okay, whatever. I'm not making them. Let me see and that's in the kid. I want to get
album like it brings this a lot.
That everyone believes in God.
Yeah. If you look at like people, like it's interesting. Yeah,
it's definitely interesting.
No, it's challenge what it means.
Not fail. That's I think that's clear. The Malbim and I think and Calvin, according to him, he quoted from Calvin.
Yeah.
Where's that Shab? Show me. The Malbim, chicken for the Malbim.
The Malbim. If you look at block safe, we're all safe, but all the Malbim kindness. No, that's safe. He means 1,000 miles from Malbim.
Claudia, the only place they say a minute is like in a thing. You know that is the
Rav Dessler, right?
No,
Claudia is like from the Ramban to Rav Dessler.
Huh? No, yeah, no, is the Malbim.
He brings the Malbim? Okay. The kid said, so now the Rambam's 3 of his 4 ra'ahs at least are of the type that we call cosmological ra'ahs. In other words, they're based on something exists and looking for who wer ist schuldig von dem? Who is responsible? But the thing is that this is not enough. We have to actually get into the detail of them, otherwise there wouldn't be 4 different ones. So let me try and see it, man. Let me try. At least eins. Very cool. Now, number 1 is as well. That best now this is, I'm gonna try to read it backwards.
Which translation is this?
This is Schwartz. This is this.
The new one.
This is great.
No, I was saying, but Heston was doing.
That end okay, is מתחייב שיש מניעה של עניית החומר המתהווה וקלה, של המין המתהווה וקלה הזה לקבל את הצורה. So lassen wir sehen, wo steht in 25 Tanoch? In 25 Tanoch steht also, as well, I'm trying to understand me push it.
Okay.
So what is this from? What is this proof from? The 25. Tanoch steht also. Basically, what's bringing there is that bring up in other words, everything that exists, according to Aristotle, is made out of 2 things. One is called matter, and the second one is called form. Yeah. Now, that also means that it had potential. Another thing that's connected to this is what Aristotle called potentiality and actuality. So, in andere Werte. Es ist nicht mal dieselbe Sache, but alles was ist the Chomer in a certain way is a Sache was hat no potential, so can just do an actual Chomer by itself. So everything that becomes anything, goes back to how anything exists. Anything that becomes anything at some point became what it is. Anything that is anything became that, unless it was forever. There's very circular reasoning, very circular words, but this is Aristotle's kind of word. Everything that is anything became that, unless it's forever, unless it's eternal. The world that we see is not eternal. And the Himmel is eternal, but not the world. But therefore, something must have made. In other words, this is very important. Everything, goes back to Aristotle's way of, if we read the Hanukkah straight, we might have somehow figured out better, but probably not. The idea was that Aristotle, again, is very worried about understanding everything. And there are very general ways of thinking about it. Arbeit der Welt. Hunters do the same, not lernen 25 like andere sciences to verstehen, wie anything out of it. But how does everything work? Everything works. In other words, he has a very general way of looking at it. Everything works by having a Chomer and Tzidus. That's number 1. That's what everything is, but also how everything works. Now, how did it come to be? It's kind of very simple if you take away the technical language. Very simple. How did a cup come to be a cup? So first there was cup ceramic, whatever this cup is made out of, and then somehow it became into a cup. Now something must have made it into a cup, right? So that kind. Now from here we get to a concept called movement or motion. Aristotle said that everything that happened in the world happened through motion. Because again, motion is what we call motion. Things moving is only one kind of motion. He said there's 4 kinds of motion, at least, or 5 kinds. And anything happening is a kind of motion. That's how we get, for example, the idea of this is a very beautiful example. The theology of the Rishonim was given, literally took scientific and philosophical concepts and then found psikim that use that language sometimes even, and they mamish made you think that it literally says that. But this is a very good example. Then the Chabad use it so much and nobody knows where it came from. Like, why would we talk about Shenisi? And was which pratich stam, right?
I don't change my word.
I don't change my word, right? It has in the Nevi'im 1,000 times. Right? Whatever I do, whatever I promise, never changes, right? Right? That's Ivrit, right? Of course, that's Ivrit. Now the Rishonim, but the Ivrit attach. Forget about Pshitish. Now I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about this. How did we? Why is? In other words, when we talk about what this bring, okay, Chabad have a new pshat of But the Shonim, the Rambam brings this pusik, right? That's where they got it. It's also interesting, right? The same psikim. Nobody found the psikim. It's amazing. The same put psikim was Maganes. Everyone uses it for their purposes. And I see it. It's so funny. I'll give this an example. I saw someone in his book, he quotes the it's someone the kibble, the guy with the rechts of the case, or someone. The thing the Ashkucha talks very sharp about the Ashkucha, all the different kinds of cars that is doing, Haktav Zai, and he brings psikim from each one. They was all this thing, literally this list of psikim is literally the Rambam's list of psikim and where the Rambam goes through the shiktas and Ashkucha, and they have the same psikim. And this guy is mamash, Rambam is totally wrong, and everything it says is mamash the opposite of what it says. But the psikim are to the selva. It's amazing how. But anyways, that's one thing that you can see. So there's only one. Maybe there's not more psikim. I don't know. It's hard for me to believe that. Like it's can't machen nach adresh. It's not acoustic. I think people just. It's like songs, you know, like why is there only songs about the three same shticklich siddur? You can explain a shticklich in the siddurs we can machen songs. Why are there 5 songs in Achashalti and not even one on the next pussy? Because everyone's copying from each other. That's why. That's why I'm kind of there's a few people that make songs on new words. Most of them just say this thing. I'm trying to catch. I look at the siddur. It's not it happens. Anyways, but there's another thing that is more interesting is that how the definition is. A more interesting thing is how the definition of things is based on how they literally took the words, the language that Aristotle and his Chassidim used, and as it was translated, of course, by the Lashon Kodesh, because almost none of these people, besides the Rambam read Arabic, but almost none of the people that we have read Arabic or Latin, almost nobody. Almost all the Jewish knowledge of everything is based on translations.
Only thing had the rabbis with the
the later people for sure. Of course, some people. But, but he was a Matargim. Why was his job a Matargim? Because everyone else didn't understand. To be honest, Lionel gave him a salary to be the Matargim for the Moira. They heard this amazing cipher Moira, and they didn't understand it. That was his job. Okay, from the fact that there's a whole Mekzoya called Matargim, can was clean. I was not like the guy from Matcha. Okay. The what I'm saying is so not, in other words, he talked about this word sheni, right? God doesn't change. What does change mean? Why would he change? How do we get to learn Kabbalah? They keep on bringing this kind of concept. Let's reinterpret. My essence doesn't change, right? God doesn't change. How did we get to this whole idea? We got to this very, very simple way, because according to Aristotle, and not only according to Aristotle, according to all in ancient Greece, was this big machlokes about change. Because change, they took change to be the most general thing that exists. They're trying to be scientists.
So motion is change.
Motion is just a kind of change, right? Because there's different ways of understanding it. But they saw that, like I said earlier, we're trying to understand the world. Now, the world has things that are similar to each other, and things that are different from each other, things that happen. So this is at least one of the most basic ways of talking about the problem of the world. That some things change, some things stay the same. But we have to understand how. We have to understand how it actually works. And those Muslim in Greece was a big machloike. And the Rambam references it even still, and other people. Because famously, what was the guy's name? Hercules and Parmenides, right? So Hercules had gehalten, alles changed. Remember, you can't step into one river twice. That was his saying, right? Of course, it's nice psychology. You can learn. Because I was saying you can't step into the same river twice. That was Hercules, and he's basically said that there's nothing that doesn't change. There is on this chat in the Welt. There's tatish, so that's tatish, but everything is changed. Everything is in flux. Everything keeps on changing. That's out from change. And he said anything that looks static to you, that looks like it stays, Sardimian. Really, it's just for this second. It's do a river, but this like is an example of the river. The river keeps on moving, right? But this second is do the river. Alles tauscht sich. Das Leben nicht kann. Weil wir do anything. Then there was a zweite guy. The guy's Parmenides. Parmenides is a paket. There's no change. There's no movement, actually. You don't actually move ever. I say those, not as else. Again, everyone, this is klar me moide. Das ist Zeitos, nicht. I don't know, wie soll man verstehen, das ist ja. And this is, of course, taken by most people to be the most crazy theory. What Parmenides said that you don't change, and then we have Zeno's paradoxes, famously, which was he's a Talmud of him, and he tried to prove Medem that change is impossible. Because how did you get there? Remember Zeno's paradox? If I move from A to B, then I must have gone through an infinite amount of steps in between. Because we keep on dividing, and infinity doesn't exist. So I can never get anywhere. So therefore, things don't change. He took it seriously. They on the paradox. They was the right that Rebbe going to I'm change kind of. And that was shittas Parmenides. So now, of course, these two shittas are Bissl Meshiga. So when you give an all other mention, we're trying to find some shure and sufficient. But my big point about this, so Aristotle said that there is change, and there's some that's Aristotle. One of his big thoughts was that there's some part of the world that changes and some part that doesn't change. And actually, the whole world is the process of the whole nature, the process of things changing. In other words, the choyme getting a certain sira and then getting a different sira, but actually the choyme seems to be the unchanging thing, or maybe not only that, maybe the sira in itself, the etzem, whatever, however we get into this whole exact theory. But it was all about this. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, to them, everything is change. Nature happening is change. This is the touch change. And therefore, Aristotle himself, when he talked about God, he said, okay, yeah, it was mind God. God is the thing that doesn't change. He causes all the change, but he doesn't change by himself. Now we have to understand how he could cause things without changing himself.
Unchanging mover.
Exactly, the unmoving mover. It means the unchanging changer. It's the same. Yeah. Exactly, that's his line. That's in this book in Heilig Chovs Shabbos. I don't know how you number book Lamed. The Lamed is like Lamed. And it has Greek numbers. I don't know what the Greek numbers are.
Different numbers, it's
based on Greek letters. Based on Greek letters.
L is 50.
He's 50. It can be 50.
L?
Nicht kein L. Das heißt nicht L. Das ist so wichtig. Das heißt Lambda. And
looks like L.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I don't know. It's the 11th chapter. Chai springt the Physikum Tos. And the kid is as dort and Pyrex Zayin, the Masbet. As God, the change of a change dich nicht. Das ist Zam Pshat in God. Okay, so that's how we got now. I'm just showing you how things happen. Now, then someone came, some Chassidish, some Yidden, maybe some, I don't know exactly who was the first one to use this, and they said, there's the Chostarten Pusik, Adu Dich Siva, Nia Violation is, but it's mamish like a medrash on the language, because you could have conceptualized the world differently. In this concept, everything has changed, and the Pusik must be talking about this concept. It says God doesn't change. That's what it means, but it's a very specific concept, and that's why. Today, since we don't think that everything has changed, maybe it is changed by some definition, but it's not the biggest it's not really such a good pshat anymore. The whole beauty of this pshat was mamish more with the science. Imagine if there would be a pusik that says, I don't know, that's man, you got my idea. Imagine there would be a pusik that says there's such medrushim. It's like using the language according to a whole new definition, which that definition was a very serious scientific, philosophical definition of the world, how everything has changed, and God is the not change. And that's how we get all these ideas that get into problems with Hashgacha, which have to do with, but that has to do with other philosophical assumptions. I'm just showing you. Okay, the kid said. Means that the world didn't.
There's no new Matthias.
To him, it means that the world that he didn't change by creating the world, whatever that. Okay,
no, he didn't. Even though he changed the world, he didn't change.
Yeah. Even though the world happened, he didn't. The Baltani's way of reading it is. Before the world there was only God, and after the world there's only God, and that didn't change in between, right? That's not what the Rishonim thought by anybody, but it's another shot, right? In other words, he assumes that there being something else besides for God in some way is a problem, right? Which nobody thought beforehand, because he had a whole new pshat in Achdus, the only thing, but it's not his. And again, he's not the one that invented this pshat, but.
Who was there before?
In the Wort and Echad, but the idea is very, very old. It goes back like to literally these kind of ideas where everything, okay, monism and stuff like that. Okay.
Who's that? Say it a little slower.
There only being one thing, and that thing being God, is Parmenides' idea, or these kind, maybe not, but there's a way of saying this. In other words, it's very old, very, very ancient idea, the idea that there's only one thing, and that thing is God. The challenge is how you understand it, and how Baltani has already a lot more history to work with. So that's why I have ideas. But anyways, okay. Nachle Naini, yes, the Maila, everything. So let's go back to the Rambam. I'm trying to show you. So therefore, everything in the world had to have changed at some point in order to be where it is. because everything has a tzira, and obviously it wasn't forever the chomer with the tzira together, because we see it changing. So it must have been there. And since the chomer doesn't move itself, it's not a moving principle, it cannot move at all. Actually, literal chomer can't move at all. So the kasha choykre in other words, so something must have moved it, right? For example, if this cup, we know the answer, right? The factory, whatever, the cup maker made the cup. That's how it got the tzira of a cup, right? We know that answer. But if we'll go a little further, we could go back by this drama in different places.
Why can't it move? Conceptually, it can't move. I mean,
it is a certain way. In other words, he's talking. To him, everything is movement. There is a certain way, and it wasn't always this way.
It cannot be that. It must have. It has nothing to not be that.
No, much simpler. I think that we can make it much simpler. This is again based on this. A cup is a cup, and not just a pile of sand or whatever it was before. A glass, glass of sand, right? And it wasn't always a cup forever. This vice, and it wasn't forever a cup. If it was forever a cup, then we would have another question. So therefore, something must have made it into a cup, and that making is a movement. Yeah. And things don't move by themselves, right? This is what he said in number 25. Things don't move by themselves. At least material, at least matter doesn't move by itself.
That's the main point,
right?
That's the proof that it can't move by itself.
Right. So this very quickly gets us to God, but he's going to go through the whole side. Things don't move by themselves. At least matter doesn't move by itself. Maybe other things do, but because we have to start thinking about animals. Some people say, well, animals move by themselves. Nobody's pushing them. So what's pushing them? But at least matter doesn't move by itself, and everything is not only matter. In order to be what it is, it has to have moved. We can even talk about conceptually moving. In other words, in a different kind of moving. In other words, it can move from being bekoich to being befal, which is the kind of movement. And Aristotle talked about there's 4 kinds of movement. And the he has different kinds of movement. We'll see. He'll say, but that's a kind of movement. It's a kind of motion. And since matter does move by itself, something has to have movement. So now the thing that moved it, either it's the same kind of thing, another piece of sand moved it, which is not really helpful, or a different kind of thing moved it, a different category of thing moved it. Now he explains, categories. Because now this is what said in Hanocha, and he doesn't say, but it's referring a different Hanocha 4. And it says over there that change happens in 4 categories. So again, there's 10 categories. The 10 categories are in Lashon Kodesh etzem, essence in English, whatever that means, what the thing is, kamas, how much of it is. This is how Aristotle literally says what the thing is, how much of it is. So kamas is a made-up word by good people and people like that. Lashon kama. Second thing is quality, eiches, how the thing is. Otherwise, is it green or purple or black or things like that? Not is it big or small, because that's kamas. Qualities, yachas, which means in English relation. This thing is of another thing. Whatever exactly that means. Time, when is it? Place, where is it?
Like a ben or av.
Yachas means relation, means
like a ben and av or something. No?
Like a binyan av, like a
binyan av. A ben is a ben. A ben is
yes. So right. If he's the son of or the father of the ofness. Has a word in grammar in English. Yeah, the ofness, like a preposition. It's called in English. The ofness, and in Aristotle, that's a thing. The ofness, the me being of something, is something about me, right? Doesn't ask this name. A thing that relates something to another thing. I think that's what it's called. That's what. Anyway, this is another place now. A 7th thing is matzav state, whatever that means. In other words, Fleischping was minded. 8 is shaycha, so relation is something else. I don't remember. And then there's what it does and what it gets done to it. Okay, that's how it was translated in Hebrew always. These are the 10 categories. Now, again, like I said, this is kind of verstanden nicht kluf, aber es being days the same Sache, but more or less they make sense, but nicht so sehr bediek. I can't throw the whole book to try to explain it. Anyways, but then the kid did that Aristotle said that where's change? Change only happens in 4 categories. Which are the 4 categories? Well, there's 4 kinds of change. Number 1 is in essence. Etzem can change. How does it change? It's called the Sabbath other words, things becoming and being destroyed is changing their essence changing. Not that the essence changes, but it stops existing. So a change in essence, in his understanding. Then, of course, kamas, things can become bigger or smaller, right? Same thing, eches, things become change colors or change different weight, or maybe it's a kind of kamas, but the color is always the example of quality. And things and space, which is the most obvious kind of movement, right? Things can be in different space. So that's his four basic movements. 4 kinds of motion in the world. No, do 4 kinds. Ich meine, ich will wissen, warum nicht du kannst movement in relation, or why is there no movement in, ich weiß nicht. I think you understand them to be equals of these 4. So we have to look up why. But that's also, so I do. The nekide is, and so never, tni nemer nimtza, ba'arba categories, and 4 of the categories, just think if it happens. So these are the 4 kinds of motion. And motion, in other words, when we say the word motion, usually we mean a certain specific kind of motion. In other words, spatial motion in space, what he calls pnias hatuka. But that's really only one kind of pnir. In the more general, in the more abstract sense, in the more real sense, actually, from him, everything is motion. Everything changing, everything becoming, everything getting another, acquiring qualities. That's motion. Because he literally says something like this: when something becomes green, so greenness came to it, moved to. So now, so this is all these prutim are just to understand the details of how we got to the cause or thing. In other words, if I see something being in a certain way, something had to have moved it, because everything about it has moved into so to speak, place of being like that. This is really the most important hanocha. But this cannot go on forever. This is probably the most important hanocha for this whole thing. That this can't go on forever. This is the hanocha shlish. The hanocha shlish says so the first 3 hanochas are all about infinity, not existing. And hanocha number 1 said that infinity, there can't be something that's infinitely large. Hanocha 2 is that there can't be an infinite amount of things. Actual things like things that take up space or time, and not time but space. The third hanocha is that an infinite amount of causes cannot exist either. On the definition, not an infinite amount of things, because we don't have where to put them, because there isn't infinite space. Well, there's an infinite space, cause infinity can't exist. That's how Aristotle thinks, so it's kind of backwards. But there's no infinite space. The world is not infinitely large. It's infinitely old, but not infinitely large. Very big difference to him. The third hanocha is that there cannot be an infinite amount of abstract things either. In other words, causes, even if those causes have no, like sichlium, that's what the word for the cause that doesn't have a body, a cause that doesn't have a thing that does things, that causes other things. I could say this, right? The galgal gemacht cycle 1 and cycle 1 made cycle 2 and so on, but this can't go on forever. Hanocha, this is cloud little. In modern things, this is called infinite regress. It's a big shadow why it can't exist. Nobody really knows, but it sounds reasonable that it shouldn't make any sense, right? Basically, the way is marach in them, it is marach in them, and Hashem is gerecht. But according to him, the basic reason why this can't exist, well, he doesn't actually say it this way. Very important. To him, it's the hanocha, one of like the base rules. These 26 are like the base rules of reality, right? The base rule. What the base rule is? Infinity cannot exist in actuality, in potential to exist, but it cannot. There's no actual infinity. Cannot exist. Not can. Therefore, you cannot tell me, basically we go back, and according to the way he understands, always he's going to talk about it in a second. Everything in the end goes back to the first. And what's wrong? And infinity is counterintuitive, but what's wrong with that? But that's infinity, man. Can infinity? So infinity is counterintuitive. It can't exist. Yeah, maybe. He kind of said that it doesn't explain everything. You just tell me to ask the question an infinite amount of time, but the tell it's nicht. So we can say weiß nicht. So man will say weiß nicht. Therefore, it's not an answer. Whenever you do infinite, in logic and philosophy, kind of infinite regress is always assumed to be a policy. You can't say why is this like this because that and just let's say this 1,000 times. It's not string theory is very tough. No, it's not infinite regress. None of these theories are infinite.
But why isn't it logical? Because it has to be like a final.
There has to be a stop condition.
So why does it be a stop? Why does it be a stop? There has to have been.
Again, according to him, because there's no room in the world, that's how I would tell. According to him, not just according to Nicky Abraham. According to the Rambam, because there's no room in the universe for infinite amount of things. Even abstract things. The abstract universe also has some kind of limit. It has to be limited. That's its limit. Nishdu. Metzias Einsof Sibas B'Poel. That's his Anocha. You want to know the proofs of the Anocha? We could go through what the proofs of that Anocha is, but it seems that the Anocha is that it cannot be.
It cannot be.
There's no room.
He's saying that it's not.
That it doesn't make sense. That's a whole other thing. Right. That's what I'm saying. It's very different. Very modern way of thinking. Help me. Okay, it's nicht. You can say I don't know. His way of thinking, you could always say ich weiß nicht. Was looking at the weiß nicht. You always end up with a very schwache proof.
No, he's very busy.
He's saying like don't start with the first one. Don't start with anything. Don't start with anything.
Just say no. Just say I don't know. In other words, if I'll ask you, this is the question. This is a very live question. This without the movement part, it still exists. The same question, right? What caused the first cause? Whatever the first cause was, nobody knows the answer. So let's assume it was something that caused that, and what caused that, right? The conceptual problem still stays. And what Richard Dawkins would say is, weiß nicht. That's basically what he said. Weiß nicht. Now the word, and what the people that try to prove a God say, that doesn't make sense. Because you're basically assuming an infinite, whatever, even though the weiß nicht, I can't problem with the nicht wissen, what's the cause number 27,800 million is. This is the problem. The problem is that whatever you say, it has to stop somewhere. It stops noch 10 billion Jahre. Wie sag steps so that won't come in the print. I care about infinity. An infinite amount of steps is illogical. And according to the Rambam, can't exist. And therefore, there must be something to cause. In other words, you don't know anything. Nothing caused it. And that doesn't make sense. But there must have been a real first cause which started it, which started the movement. That's what I'm saying. That the modern way of thinking makes it much more complicated. The Rambam's way of thinking, I thought it's actually much more simple because he really talking about movement. He's not really talking about causing existence. It's very important. The next group is talking about good. That's the difference in the three. That basically, if we'll get to the three proofs. Basically, skip the second one, and the third one, and the fourth one. You'll see that all of them are basically about the question of who caused the cause and so on. So cosmological and this language. But they're talking about different things, and this seems to make a big difference. If we would have been able to work with this, life would have been easier. Because here he's not talking about what makes the world exist. Very important. It could have existed forever. Maybe it doesn't have a cause, maybe it has to have a cause. But that is not from them. Who made it move? Which is the actual thing. And since we kind of have an explanation for every movement besides for the first one, so just saying, well, there's an infinite amount of unknown causes sounds very silly. Not only technically, there's playing Akasha, and because they actually asked this question. He's the big chilik on this Hanoch. He said that there could be an infinite amount of causes that make sense to him. We have to get he disagrees with the whole Hanoch, but or at least he tried. Yeah, he's very. But it seems that I'm just saying, if he's still thinking in his way, this is actual science. In other words, to Aristotle, to the Rambam's Sibir Shainim, if you look in Perikal, you'll see it very seriously, simply. The God of the proof from motion, we'll call this the cosmological proof from motion. Not the cosmological proof from existence. That's actually the third proof. Has such a proof. But from motion is a very simple proof, and it's simple in the sense that this is it's only one step beyond. It's technically based on the impossibility of an infinite regress, because you can always say actually do unasa, but we kind of know every single one until God. Seht sein anders der Welt, wie du sagst, wie seht aus der Welt? Ein Galgal, zwei, nein Galgalen, Gott, nein. And it must end, so that's the God that ends it. It's very different from just doing conceptually. There's causes, nobody knows what the causes are, maybe they never end.
What do you think? That they already knew what all the causes are?
He's not even talking about causes in the abstract. He's talking about causes of motion. In other words, movers, right? That's the language. Maniim.
Right.
He not only knows that God is. This is also a big chilik. This is why I have to disagree with this whole book. He's not only talking about that there is a God. He also knows what God is doing. What does God do with his time? Right. Big, very interesting question. When you take the medrash, there was on top after we finished making the world. There was on top. According to this proof, I mean, at least partially, was that he moves the world the whole time. Well, I don't know, maybe he only moved it once, when, but that's his job, that's his thing.
He's a mover. Yeah.
He's a mover. In other words, he has the same job. In this system, his job is not only to end the infinite regress. It's technically what he's doing, because otherwise we don't have a proof. Actually, do not a mover, but it's an infinite regress of movers, not an infinite regress in the abstract. God is the first mover. We know what movers are. Actually, and this is where one of I keep saying this is. And
you don't need him. You don't need to stop infinity. You need him because you need him. That's what you mean?
Because you need to stop the infinity of movers. Like,
why is that better than some?
It's definitely better.
Why?
No, abstractly it's not better, but it's massive better. Because I know what God is about, what kind of thing He is. I mean, not exactly, because He moves in a different way than everything else. But I'm saying, for example, one of the funny things that I keep on bringing this to show this point. In this book, and after he proves that God is the first mover, then there's a whole parak which talks about how many first movers there are. Yeah, exactly as it is. And Mamish and he seems to come up with a number like 47. Okay, and then at the end it says it's only one. It's like Mamish is some people say the point or forget. But the point is that the logic of the 47 actually makes some kind of sense, because he's talking about things he figured out. What's the number 47 based on? How many movements there are in the spheres, in the Galgalan. So he came up with a number for whatever he doesn't know, 47 or 55, a number. It's a pretty large number. So that's the amount, and all of these movements cannot be ascribed to something else. That's the point, right? He comes to a dead end 47 times in his physics. His physical universe has 47 dead ends. In other words, like you said, everything on this world, in the end, comes up to the Galgalan. Okay, the Galgalan, I have, okay, this is one, okay, Dreit is God. Now I have another Galgal, and he doesn't seem to be the one that's turning the previous one, according to this Cheshvan, maybe. According to other Cheshvan, not according to this Cheshvan. So who's turning it? Not God. What I'm trying to show now, of course, you could say this is illogical because who made those gods? So we anyways have to end up with one beside it. But the point, what I'm showing is that the concept of a mover is actually a physical thing. It belongs to physics almost, this God. This is the God of physics, not the God of causality, not the God of, and it's technically...
The Kasha made those gods not negay in this thing.
In this system, it's negay from inside the different, another Kasha. That's how they start to exist. But I'm just showing you that this very, very defined job, this God, this kind of God has a very defined job, at least made sense. Now again, maybe it seems like in Maskudas in the end that there's only one. Okay, well now, back to that. My community, I don't care. He lived in a pagan world. It would make sense for him to believe in 47. Whatever. This gets into a whole other discussion of it. He worshipped God. To the temple, whatever. Now, of course, maybe he didn't believe that. Whatever. He didn't. He wasn't a Rumba Venus.
Yeah, those times, all this was. They only start taking all these things seriously in the Arabic time.
No, religions take this seriously. They did. Whatever. This is a complicated. It's a very complicated question, but it's not. But my point is that if you, in physics, that's what I'm saying. Okay, let me for the ending of this. Sorry, 2:30. Because he has this is very detailed. This various nishtam. Then the dentist.
Have to be the 240 to...
Okay, met leen een stuk. Okay, met een stuk. Met ongeveer. Ik dacht neem die paar. Ik vind hem wel bezig. Misverstaan je de wat. He must have written it for a reason, no? Okay. Gezegd, Leute nemen zich lijns af. So bekitze, because so Matsuni, so Maila kimt out. Matsuni Aifa, she called Tania, she was back here, and Tania is the gift of Hamishi. So it can't go forever, but the bekitze is, we know that all movement must end by the movement of the fifth gift, which is the Galgalim, which have a fifth kind of climate, right? There's 4 years under the moon, but there's a fifth kind of climate, which is a very different kind of climate because it never stops existing. And it's the climate of the heavens, of the Galgalim, where are Chumeh Chameshi. Sham Nifsekes, Matni as well as Mistaf, Mishtal, Kol Mania, in Meichen, but Mashafut. What Mania means mover, Meichen means what prepares the Chumeh to get it seeded. That's how his language means. In other words, we know where our science is complete. We know where everything stops. I mean, we might not actually know to trace everything. At least theoretically, it's very complete science. Alles in the world is kinds of movement, and all of the movement end up in the Himmel. Yeah. The Himmel Titalis. Is the beginning of the cause of everything in Olam HaShafel. Olam HaShafel just means the literal lower world, the one under the moon, right? Now, the Galgal itself, no Tnias HaTokeh, it moves movement. Tnias HaTokeh just means movement, moving movement. The three other kinds of movements which are not really moving. In the 14th Hanocha, he explained that all other movements actually start from moving movement. So it's not only the one that makes the most sense, it actually has a proof why this has to be the first one. If you want to, so look at that. The movement of the etzem of things, the savas v'kiloin, has to first change. In other words, before it stops existing, it changes a little. So halfway it exists, so it changes. And now changes. How does it change? Something have to change it. How did it change it? By being close to it, because he doesn't believe in action at a distance. It has to be close to it. So something must have moved to the thing. In order for something to stop existing, Stippen is a kind of movement, is movement. Therefore, all movement can be traced back to movement, and that's what the Galgalim do. The Galgalim don't do anything; they only move in the space movement and spatial movement, right? Movement. And therefore, that's the logic. Therefore, the logic is that all different kinds of movement, like things stopping to exist, like things getting different qualities, are all, at the end of the day, movement. And the Galgalim did do that. Now, now he goes through a nice mursal. So therefore, every movement that you see comes in the end from the Galgal movement, the mursal. Even mesiemes hano, yeah, a moving rack. You see a rack moving. So who moved the rack? Didn't move itself. A stick. And who moving the stick? A hand. Who's moving the hand? Giddim. Who's moving the giddim? Shririm. That's a muscle. And who's moving the muscles? The other piece. And who's moving the atzuvim? Atzavim, nerves. Okay, but I don't know what is this. This it looks like, yeah, that's let's look at what it means, but I don't know. Nerves. Okay. Now who moves the muscles? Okay, so here he stops being hunting Dr. Rai. is magic, not magic. Natural heat. That's what they assumed heat to be a basic thing. And heat is what moves the muscles, okay?
And body temperature.
Not body temperature. Here it totally stops being matching the sign. This is because they kind of didn't know anything what's going on in the body. They just made up stuff. There's heat and there's mudish chayde, all kind of things. So heat is what moves the nerves. Now who moves heat? Hatzira shabai. Right? Now who moved the heat? He's showing you a very good example of how I understand the world. Who moves the heat? The tzira. In other words, the tzira udam, basically the person or the animal, which has something called the form of a person. That's what made the thing have heat. Okay? And this additional list. This is the first in this category. In other words, it's not really the mini addition, but in a certain sense, animals have something that starts with them, right? We talk about bechira, but the point is that the nefesh, which is the tzira, same thing, right? Nefesh means tzira. That's what causes the heat, and that's what causes. This is his. Now, why did this nefesh? Now we kind of, in a certain sense, we change kinds of causes now, because now we're asking a why question, not a what question. But in his view, these are basically the same things, because why is there also causes? Because it's called neological causes, right? Called tachlis, causes of the sort of tachlis. But to him, that's the same kind of thing. Now, now what could have moved this? An opinion, or an daya means not an opinion. It looks like in order 52. It means intelligence or a mind can move this.
Mind, usually that is mind.
Well, a daya means an opinion, really. It means an opinion here. Because I can see what he said it earlier. In other words, they had this problem with those machlokas. Some people said that animals move without a mover. Nothing is moving them, obviously. And it's not true. The animal epis, including the person, right? Why is it doing something? Because he wants something. Now, daya could be he wants something because he really wants it, or it could be a dimin. There's something in his mind that's moving it. In other words, he wouldn't say something in his mind. He wouldn't say it's moving towards something. It has a tachlis. It has a point. It has a tilos, right? It has a matur. It's going somewhere. So that is the cause of this. Lamushal, he says, the mushal you want to close a window or a door or something, so you're pushing the stone to close the door. So what's this? What is moving the? We know how from the person's mind, we know how the whole order of things. And what's moving the person's mind? The idea that he had, the opinion that he had, that he wants to close the door. So all of this is moving towards closing the door. Okay, right? So in other words, what caused this whole cycle? The wind that's blowing through the window or the door. Okay, the wind is moving. We got if we don't give him to do it, we'll stop by the galgal, okay? You'll wonder a whole week what's moving the galgal. Now, you have to see, because this is very good, very important, because people just know everything very clueless. Same as this Arabic, actually, according to him. The wind is what caused him to want to close the door, right? So, and now who caused the wind? The galgal. That was very quick. I don't know how exactly the galgal causes the wind. Maybe there's some theory somewhere that explains. In other words, let's say the stone killed a bug. So really, what killed the bug was the wind. What the galgal made the wind. Now we have to just figure out.
The day is not a fully natural. I mean, in animals,
it is natural. It is. It's always not natural. It's what do you mean natural? It's an idea, but an idea is a thing that exists. To him, that's what I'm saying.
It happens. It's no choice. It has to happen.
No, even if there's a choice, that doesn't change anything. By the way, the Aristotle system doesn't really have a lot of bechira, but that's another problem. They didn't care so much about bechira in Aristotle system. Doesn't matter that even if there's still a causal. Right. Let's say the person chose this to be the matzah. It could be. There's bechira in the person. It doesn't matter. There's still a chain of causes that goes back to the galgal for everything that happened in the world. We could look about an animal, maybe it doesn't have bechira, it would be easier, but even a person.
Something in between.
In his language, this is important. In his understanding, Aristotle's understanding that tachlis is the actual cause. We don't usually modern science doesn't hold like this usually, although nobody knows why. Position in philosophy. In other words, when I asked, but it seems intuitive to us because we forgot how they thought. And when you look at you could really answer in two different ways. You could ask, "I want to drink coffee." That's usually psychology. That's not science. That's the psychology. The science would be because there's something in your brain that's addicted to coffee, and that's in other words, so we could call it only backwards causes, no forwards causes. This is called There's a debate called teleology, TEL whatever. Telos. In Aristotle's way, things want to go have addresses also. They don't only have things where they come from. In other words, for example, the example is, for example, things fall down because they want to go down, not because something is pushing them down. Like it. Andere cancer have it's pushed this. That's how modern science would say. Well, they're pulling it doesn't matter, but it's something it doesn't want. It doesn't have whatever it is. It doesn't want anything. And that's how it's a cause. It's a cause that pushes it. Well, Aristotle said no. The killing wants. The Rambam calls it doesn't want. Doesn't have will in the human sense. Doesn't have bechira, but it wants. It has a goal. It has a goal without having a will. It has a goal. It has a tachlis. It has a point. It has a how do they call it? How do you call it in English? Telos. The Greek word, but it goes somewhere. In other words, things are the way they are, also because they have a tachlis. They're going somewhere. That's why the whole language of tachlis oda comes from here. I gave a whole story about this one. So then and whatever when he talks about the point of a person, tachlis, of teaming in the tachlis. Tachlis is a Aristotelian concept of causes. Things. The word tachlis. Yeah. That's in davening, they say it becomes tachlis mazish man. Yeah, doesn't mean that. It means the end. Right, of course. It's like the goal. Yeah, that's a nice shot. Again, whoever made up the word tachlis, it makes sense because in English you would say end actually. The word end in Aristotle means not the end. It means the goal. Right? Like end point. To the end, towards the end of that it's going towards the end. So it makes sense. The grammar makes sense, but it's just two different concepts. So this is the concept of tachlis, and what I'm saying is, and to him that's a cause. Aristotle said there's 4 causes, and it's brought a lot of I like his idea. It's very different than how you sign. There's 4 causes, right? And the Guru has a name in English. Yeah, but he stole it from someone. I have to look where he got it from. This is people that said that the girl didn't read philosophy, read a lot of philosophy.
Yeah, he said, pick up 90.
Only 70 things, but this is not one of those 70 things. No, his whole structure is based on philosophy. A lot of such kind of structure. Anyway, so the 4 causes are material cause, charma. In other words, what is the thing made out of? Sira is what makes it to be in that configuration. That's basically what Sira is. Pile is efficient cause in English. What causes it?
Efficient?
Yeah, that's what it's called in English. I mean, pile. What efficient means doing, not efficiency. Technical term. Means the person that made it into a cup or so on, or the thing. And tachlis is towards what it is, or for what it is. That's how we usually say. Right? A cup is for drinking. So one of the causes, according to Aristotle, one of the causes for the cup is that it's for drinking. One of the reasons why the cup is a cup. You don't have a full understanding of a cup until you know what it's for. Of the causes. Most people today wouldn't say that's a cause, but he literally uses this as a cause. And the big mushal, for example, there's a big piece about this if that's the only cause. But the mushal is that when he talks about God being the first mover, and the Ram doesn't quote it here, but this is in other places he talks about it. So that God as the first is not the first mover in an efficient sense or in any other sense. The Rambam has a whole parak about this, about if God is Poyel Olam or Tachlis Tziras Olam. Remember? But it all means is that there's in Aristotle's way, God is the thing towards which the Galgalim are going. That's how he. In other words, he has a kasha. We know that everything that moves something else moves along. It has to have some kind of movement in it to push you. So when you say God pushes the Galgalim but doesn't push himself, what does that mean? So his teretz, that's one teretz that he has said, is that he is the thing toward which the Galgal, and this actually also was beautifully appropriated by the religious people. They said that, like the Sefer Yitzhak said, "Lifnei kisem mishtachvin." They said that it's put in so many ways. The Galgalim turn because they're going turning towards God. The chika that they could use the word chika, or they're not only bang, but they're trying to go up there. They have a sukkah. How do you the shikha, like an attraction? They're attracted to God, and the attraction to God is actually what turns the whole world. The Galgalim are attracted to God with the cycle of the Galgalim, whatever, not the Galgalim themselves, but they are attracted to God, and that's actually that's the sense in which God is turning it. He doesn't turn it by pushing it, because then he would be moving himself. He turns it by being the thing towards which they are turning. It's very nice chat, but then there's other places where they talk about God also being the other 4 causes of the world. But there's at least this, in this sense, he is the cause of the world. The God is. I always think that's not an addition of any action, but okay. But this said, I didn't make it up. Addition means that would mean I cause it. Ani acha means I'm where it's going. The Rambam talks about this when he talks about tachlis.
No, nice. Ani acha means that I'm an English. That's Ani acha.
Well, yeah, by being, so that's what I'm saying. But in there, this is just another way of causing it. Yeah. It's not before. It's after. It's the end. But it's the end that thing's going to an end. That's how we get the whole thing of Sif Maaseh Machshavot Tchila. It makes sense to think about it like this, because they say that the cause actually was in your mind before. It just means
there's more new meaning according to this. Sif Maaseh Machshavot Tchila means that it's called it.
Yeah, it's actually doing it, but it's based on the fact, right? But it's because this kind of cause is really in the mind of whoever is like the kavanah, right? Anyway, that's how. Okay, but here he's going to explain why it has to be why it can't be a gift. Okay, we'll get to it next time. I think that's upsat in them, no? I think that we get something out of this.
Yeah.
It takes very long to get it.
A lot of, not even the words. The words.